Well, LifeHouse, it's a joy to be with you. And I was with you in July one of those evenings and had a great time here. It was the first time I had a chance to worship with other believers in like months. And now I'm thrilled to be with you on this COVID, cold, crazy, snowy Sunday morning. So you all get bonus points for being here. Those of you that are here downstairs too, and those of you that are like actually tracking with us online, you get bonus points for being smart enough to stay home under your covers. So Eileen and I are your missionaries in Belgium. We're your missionaries in Belgium, in London, Ontario. That's the truth. And yet, I've been teaching. I'll be up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning to get teaching in Belgium tomorrow morning. We're doing everything that we would be doing in Belgium. I'm preaching actually next weekend in a church in Leuven in Belgium. So I'm doing everything I would be doing in Belgium locked down, which is what's going on in Belgium right now. All the schools are closed. I'd be sitting in my apartment, which is now being inhabited by another teacher. So we're still paying our rent in Belgium, still kind of half living in Belgium, and yet we get to do it here in London. And that's kind of nice because we get to see our kids, our grandkids. And if we're going to be locked down, well, this summer, perhaps you know this, this summer I discovered that I have cancer. And so I've been under treatment right here in London. It couldn't be in a better place. I'm the last guy to get into a clinical study. And so the good news is I'm in the clinical study. The bad news is I'm taking all kinds of hormones and chemotherapy, and it makes me feel a little loopy at times. And so that's kind of funny because what's happened is maybe you've noticed my voice has gotten a little higher now that I'm taking these hormones. And I've developed a real appreciation for silk and lace. And so life has changed. I may weep. I may weep. It's not because I'm so spiritual. It's just because I'm on hormones. Anyway, we're thrilled to be here, and we're grateful to LifeHouse because you have been faithful supporters of our ministry. And we're still ministering because you're supporting us. So thank you so much. I want to get to the Word of God because I know I've just got a few minutes to do this. It's coming around. Habakkuk chapter 2. Most people don't know Habakkuk. One day you'll run into him in heaven. He'll say to you, did you read my book? And you'll say, well, who are you? Habakkuk chapter 2. It's in the Minor Prophets. It's about waiting. This whole book is about waiting. And I think we've been waiting through this COVID season. I want you to take a look at this video clip from a Disney movie. Take a look at this, and you'll get an idea what it's like to be waiting.
Coming through!
This is Officer McCorn. We got a 1031.
I got Tim! Officer Hobbs! I am in pursuit! Woo! I need you to run a plate.
Flash is the fastest guy in there. You can run the plate like that. Wait.
They're all sloths? They're all sloths?
What, are you saying that because he's a sloth he can't be fast?
Are you saying that because he's
Flash,
a
Flash, 100-yard
fast?
dash. Buddy,
Flash,
it's nice to see you.
100-yard dash.
to-
Buddy, it's nice to see you.
Nice see you. To see you.
Officer
Two.
Judy Hobbs, CPD, how are you?
I
Officer
am-
Judy Hobbs, CPD, how are you?
Doing. I am doing
Fine.
well. What
Fine?
Hang in there.
can I
Hang in
do?
there.
Can
Well,
I
I was hoping you could run a plate.
for you
I was hoping
for
you could.
today?
I was hoping you
Today.
could. Well, I was hoping you could run a plate for us. We are in a really big hurry.
What's
We are in a
the
really big hurry.
plate? What's
29 T
number?
29 T
No.
29 THD 03 29 THD 03
2 9 T
HD 03 HD 03
H
D 03
H
D 03.
D.
03.
D.
03.
0.
3.
0.
3.
Hey, Flash, want to hear a joke?
No!
Hey, Flash, want to hear a joke?
Sure.
No!
What do you call a three-humped camel?
What do you call
I don't.
three-humped camel?
No, I don't.
Pregnant.
No.
Pregnant.
Yes! Very funny, very funny. Quick, please, just focus on the test.
Hey,
Wait.
Priscilla.
Oh, no!
Yes?
Wait.
Priscilla.
Oh, no!
Flash?
What?
Flash?
Do. What?
No!
You call.
A
Do.
three-humped camel! Pregnant! Okay, three, we got it! Pregnant!
Jumped.
Please
jumped.
Hurry! We've got to beat the rush hour in. Hurry!
It's night.
We gotta beat the rush hour in. It's night!
How many of you love waiting? Nobody. I didn't think so. I can't stand waiting. It just drives me nuts. Somehow I feel that I'm a privileged person. Everything should sort of like happen for me. And how many of you know waiting is hard work? I mean, at times it can even test our faith. It's especially difficult when there are no guarantees that our waiting will ever end in this lifetime. Desires we long for, prayers that we are waiting to get answers to, news that we've been waiting to hear. It can all tempt us to become impatient with life, impatient with God, discouraged, we worry, and we even wonder, does God really care? But like it or not, waiting is part of the Christian life. And it's a theme in this book of Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk is living in a time very similar to ours. There's corruption in high places. There's anger and rage between people. There's violence in the streets. And we've seen it play out over and over and over during this COVID, Black Lives Matter election season that we've been living through in North America. The book of Habakkuk opens with his sincere but desperate plea to God. Habakkuk is crying out and he says, Lord, how long must I cry for help? And God, you're just not listening. It's so frustrating. And God's silence is pushing Habakkuk to despair. I mean, it's not the first time he prays. He's been praying and waiting and waiting and praying. I mean, he's on hold with Rogers or the 407. Anybody here ever been on hold with Rogers? Anyway, he's on hold. Your call will be processed by the next available service technician. He's driving him crazy. And then God finally answers. And when God answers in chapter 1, Habakkuk is just not impressed. I mean, God's answer turns Habakkuk to confusion, to frustration. He says, you want to know what I'm going to do about your rage, about the anger and the corruption and the violence in Judah? You want to know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send a more outrageous people, a more corrupt people, a more violent people to straighten it all out. That's what I'm going to do, Habakkuk. So meet the Babylonians. They're coming your way. And Habakkuk is frustrated. To him, it seems unfair. It seems downright unfair for God to choose a ruthless, godless, pagan people to come and to discipline his own covenant people, Judah. And so Habakkuk gives it some thought, and he lets out another complaint. And this time, it seems so right. It seems so reasonable. And how could God possibly resist? And then this. Take a look at it in chapter 2, in verses 1 and 2. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he says to me and what answer I'm to give to this complaint. Let me ask you a question. Does that sound just a little defiant to you? I mean, do you detect that kind of note of defiance here? Disappointment, outrage, bewilderment, devastation, heartache. Habakkuk's gamut of emotions just fill his heart as he speaks to God upon learning that the discipline God has chosen for unfaithful Judah involves these hateful Babylonians. And so here's Habakkuk standing on the ramparts in defiance before the mighty God, and he's saying, God, if you won't protect us, then I will. Shaking his fist, shouting, come on, God. Oh, I'll tell you, that's my kind of prophet. Come on down here, God, and fight like a man. How many of you have ever felt like that with God? Like, I'm sick and tired of you being up in heaven and dealing us all this stuff. I want you to get down here or I can talk to you. But then note this too. Then the Lord replied. Wow. Here's Habakkuk shaking his fist. And here's God. It's the humility of God and the defiance of man. Do you get the picture? The puny man shaking his angry, self-righteous fist and calling the sovereign, thrice holy God, the creator of the universe, to task? It would be funny if it wasn't so pathetic. But, and folks, I want you to see this. This is grace. But God deigns to answer again. Remember, God's already given Habakkuk an answer, but, well, obviously the first answer didn't suit. I mean, obviously it wasn't a good enough answer for Habakkuk. Didn't suffice for puny man. And so God gives us more. And in the more that he gives us, what he reveals to us is what's behind his actions. The fact that, yes, God will raise up these awful, ruthless Babylonians to come and discipline Judah. Yes, that's going to happen. But don't you worry, Habakkuk. I'm still a holy God. Don't you worry, Habakkuk. I'm going to let you see behind what I'm doing. And folks, this is the thing that you and I need to realize. Sometimes God is at work where we don't see him at work. And when you're waiting and you're frustrated and you're wondering and you've had it up to here with God, well, maybe the humility of God will respond to you. And so God says this, write down the revelation, make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Listen, Habakkuk, I want you to write this down. Take some notes. Write it down clearly so any idiot can read it. And so God gives us some of his basic operating system. He gives us his basic operating principles. The first one is this: God doesn't always act immediately. I know. I mean, I kind of like it when I go to McDonald's that my burger is in my hand before I've asked for it. You know what I mean? My feeling about a balanced diet is like a Big Mac in each hand. And so I like it when I want it right away. But God isn't at your beck and call. And he's not always acting immediately. So if the waiting if the waiting kills you, how many of you have ever written an exam and waited to get the answer? How many of you have ever written an essay and waited to get the grade? How many of you ever had medical tests and had to wait a week and 2 weeks and a month before you get the appointment with the doctor? Well, let me tell you something. That's how God operates. The revelation awaits an appointed time. You can't rush God. And guess what? He's not intimidated by you or your schedule. He's got his own schedule. He may not come when you want him, the old black spiritual says, but he's right on time. Number one, then, God doesn't always act immediately. Number two, you can take it to the bank. Now hear this. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. I know, sometimes you're wondering, how can anything good come out of this mess? And that's how Habakkuk feels. How could anything good come out of these ruthless Babylonians coming to invade his country? How can that be a good thing? And this is where God is an expert. He delights in bringing good out of garbage. He loves to pull out his purposes from impossible situations. Remember David and Goliath? Impossible. Remember Jehoshaphat when he was being threatened by the Moabite confederacy, and the Lord said, you worship, and he put worshipers in front of the army, and he defeated the Moabites. How many of you remember the Arameans who were camped around Samaria and were besieging Samaria, and the people in the city were starving, and Elisha said, in 24 hours, you'll all be fed and eating, and people said, it can't possibly be. But you know what? The Arameans heard the sounds of an army. They deserted their camp, and they left all their food behind for the starving Samaritans. If God says it, he'll do it. But you can also expect delays. Gee, I hate that. I hate it when I'm driving down the 401, especially when I have to be somewhere at a certain time, and I see one of those like flashing signs on the side of the road says expect delays, especially when I'm looking down the road and I don't see anything in the way. So boom, I'm going down the road, I'm barreling down the 401, and then all of a sudden, stink, there's a delay. Well, guess what? On God's timetable, you better expect delays. You better know that it's not happening just the way you thought that it would. Though it linger, wait for it. Listen, I'm an important guy. I got places to go, things to do, people to see. What do you mean, wait? Expect delays, but still expect fulfillment. It will certainly come and will not delay. So hold on now. It's going to linger. I got to wait for it, but it will not delay. Folks, this is what we call faith. And to believe in spite of what you see. Somebody had that word today, right? Like not believing the things that we see. Sometimes it takes great faith to trust that the God that your life depends on is still the sovereign God. He still has it all under control. Particularly when it looks like he's absent. God is in charge. And that requires faith. But David, how can I keep believing in spite of what seems to be happening? That's what the rest of this chapter is about. God is at work when you don't see him at work. And folks, I'll tell you something. I just think if Christians did better at just reading the Bible, we'd find so many answers to the crises and the challenges and the problems of life. If we just read the book, there's so much wisdom in this book. And here's the principle when it comes to it doesn't look like God's doing anything. Listen, how many of you know that little expression? What goes around comes around. Listen, what goes around, God knows what he's doing. He does it with the Babylonians. It looks like evil is getting ahead, but maybe you remember this poem from grade school. James Russell Lowell, that great poem, The Present Crisis. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, and yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. You know what? God's in control, my friend. You can take that to the bank. Your faith calls you to believe that that is reality. Here's what God says about Babylon. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. Yes, Habakkuk, you're absolutely correct. In chapter 1, you're saying, how can you use such an unjust people? You're absolutely right. But the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. You stay connected. You stay plugged in. You stay dependent on the Lord. Because while the enemy's puffed up, he gathers to himself all the nations, and he takes captive all the peoples. And if you just look with your natural eyes, you're going to get completely overwhelmed. If you just look at what's going on in the world with natural eyes will deceive you. Listen, friends, never doubt this. God knows what he's doing. And there is coming a reckoning. There is coming a reckoning. God outlines in the rest of this chapter 5 woes for Babylon. You know what? There's a reckoning for those who squeeze the nations. There's a reckoning for those who squeeze the nations. And man, in our world, isn't that part of what's going on? Not only have we plundered aluminum and gold and titanium from developing countries, but you know what? A lot of the waste produced in the West ends up in illegal waste dumps in Africa and China, often, believe it or not, marked as charitable donations. You know what? There's a reckoning coming for those who squeeze the nations. There's a reckoning coming for those who live by cheating. You know, small businesses have been closing at an alarming rate during this COVID season. But you know what? The billionaires of the world, they've increased their wealth by 27% since COVID came along. Do you know that 46% of the world's wealth is held by the top 1% of the world's population? Guys, that's just not fair. I don't care how it happens. It's just not right. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain. There's coming a reckoning for those who thrive on injustice. Every year, human traffickers earn $150 billion. 2/3 of it through sex trafficking, 1/3 of it through forced labor. Listen, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. And then, you see, what you got to understand is it starts, you got to watch the progression. It starts with social exploitation, economic corruption. It comes down to moral declension. It's in the same list, friends. Get it? A lot of the times as evangelicals, Pentecostals, we're really concerned about moral sins as if they were different than social sins. You know what? Sin is sin, socially, economically, justice-wise, and morally in your life and mine. You know what? There's coming a reckoning for those who pursue sensual pleasure. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they're drunk so they can gaze on their naked bodies. I don't understand how they lived in that day, but that sounds like stuff that may be going on in our day. But here's where the root of it is. Those who worship the work of their hands. It all comes down to idolatry. Well, listen. Idolatry is something we don't really understand in the contemporary age. Idolatry is about recognizing that the God we worship is a God we fashion ourselves. And at the bottom line of it, what idolatry is about is it's about declaring our autonomy. I'm not listening to that God. I'm listening to my own God. And you know what? That's the root of all woes. And so we're back to that dangerous posture that Habakkuk had, standing, shaking his fist at God. It all starts there. And it starts with shaking our fist at God. Who hasn't done that at one time or another? But it ends when we get hardened like Babylon. But how many of you know what goes around comes around? What goes around comes around. God has a plan. Though it linger, wait for it. it will certainly come and not delay. I think this is the key. When pondering imponderables, this is what it's really all about. Here's what it says: for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Never doubt it. Whatever it looks like right now, this is the ultimate destiny. And you know what? As much as sinful humans and rebellious people and nations set themselves up against God, the cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you. You know what? You can push, you can push, you can push, but what goes around eventually comes around. And guys, we're not talking about an inflexible principle of karma here. We're talking about God. God. Because history is his story. He's the sovereign God. Barack Obama had knit to the carpet of the Oval Office, among other quotes, this one from Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Now, guys, it doesn't just do that because that's how gravity works. It does that because God is at work. God is at work. And finally, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. What a contrast. You know what? The idol sits where it's put without any ability to hear or to respond or to speak. It remains silent. When God is silent, it's because he's chosen to be. And when he speaks, it's time for us to be silent. The Lord resides by his almighty power in his holy temple, ready to act for his purposes, his plan, and his people. And he'll do it when he chooses. Sometimes we need to shut up too. Stop complaining. Stop griping. Start looking up and waiting on the Lord. Well, guys, bless you. Father, I pray that these words, challenging words, Lord, I pray that these words would live in our hearts as a challenge, God, in the face of stuff we don't understand, a challenge to believe you and believe in your purposes. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much, and God bless you.